A 10-year-old boy found his grandmother dying on a rain-soaked street, a silver locket clutched in her frozen hand. Inside was a number she'd forbidden him to call, except in the worst emergency. He dialed. A voice like ancient death answered. What he didn't know, he'd just contacted a vampire king who'd been searching for his human mother for years. And every enemy of the throne just heard the call. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I'll be dropping another story just as interesting as this one, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. The street had once been cobbled and quaint, but tonight, the rain and shadow turned it into a slippery black wound in the city. 10-year-old Noah knelt beside the still figure of his grandmother, Eleanor, his worn sweatshirt quickly soaking through from the wet stone. His small hands were pressed against the back of her wrist, searching, praying for the faint thump she insisted he could always find. Nothing. Eleanor was a woman of quiet routines and comforting smells: cinnamon, old paper, and lavender soap. They had been out later than usual, Eleanor insisting on walking home despite the late hour. Now she was a statue of deep, ominous red velvet, slumped against a crumbling brick wall. The streetlights above, haloed by the mist, cast a stark, theatrical glow on the scene, making the shadows look impossibly deep, like holes in the world. Noah shook her again, his throat tight with a fear that tasted like metal. "Grandma? Eleanor? Please, wake up." She was cold. Not just damp from the rain cold, but a profound, unnatural chill that sank into his bones. He knew he had to call 911, that's what she always told him. But something stopped him. Eleanor had always been insistent about certain things, one of them being the heavy, antique silver locket she always wore, even to bed. If there is ever a real, terrifying emergency, the kind you can't tell the police about, she had said, her eyes suddenly serious, you open the locket and use the number. Only then. Never forget it, Noah. His mind, usually buzzing with video game strategies, was now razor-sharp. He dug the silver locket from beneath the lapel of her velvet dress. It was heavy, strangely warm despite her cold skin. He managed to pry open the tarnished backing. Engraved beneath a faded photo was a single, unfamiliar phone number. It was the only option he had left. Noah's fingers, shaking with cold and panic, struggled to dial the number on his own basic phone. He pressed send. 1 ring. 2 rings. A voice answered. It wasn't a cheerful greeting or a generic, automated message. It was a single, resonant word that cut through the pouring rain and the distance. Speak. It was a man's voice, deep and smooth, yet utterly devoid of warmth. It carried an accent that spoke of centuries, not countries, formal, commanding, and ancient. It vibrated with a contained power that Noah could somehow feel even through the phone's cheap speaker. I found a woman," Noah stammered, pulling the collar of his wet shirt higher. He glanced down at Eleanor, his hand protectively on her shoulder. "She's unconscious. On the street. She's really cold, and she won't wake up." "Location," the voice commanded, sharp as a drawn rapier. "It's the cross of Mallow and Old Guild Street. By the lampposts, near the old theater." The sudden silence on the line was heavier than the rain. "Describe the woman," the voice, Darius Nightborn, demanded, the cold formality tightening into a barely controlled intensity. "She's old, but pretty," Noah said, looking at Eleanor's still, pale face. "Long white hair. She's wearing a thick red velvet dress. The kind that looks really old, too. And she's holding onto a..." Noah realized the locket was still in his hand. A silver locket. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was the absolute cessation of sound, a vacuum of recognition. "What is your name, boy?" "Noah." "Noah. Listen to me very carefully. You are not to move. You are not to speak to anyone, police, paramedics, no one. Do not drop the phone. Do you understand?" The voice cut him off, Final and absolute. We are coming. Stay exactly where you are. The line went dead. Noah stared at his phone, his mind reeling. We are coming? He had just called a king, though he only knew he had called a monster. His desperation had locked him into a contract with the unknown. Noah crouched lower, pulling his grandmother closer. He looked around. The street was utterly empty, save for the flickering gas-style streetlights. It felt like the entire city was holding its breath. It was less than 2 minutes later, but felt like an hour. He heard it, the powerful, rhythmic thump of hooves. A black carriage, enormous and impossibly silent for its size, glided into the intersection. It was not a car, but a true anachronism, sleek, obsidian black, drawn by 2 massive, equally black horses whose clopping steps were somehow muffled to a whisper. The only sound was the slight whisper of the tires on the wet street. The carriage stopped. The door opened, not by a driver, but by an unseen force. A man stepped out. It was Darius Nightborn. He was magnificent and terrifying, exactly the person Noah had heard on the phone. His coat was a midnight blue velvet, the high, stiff collar framing a face of impossible perfection, yet utterly ruthless. His eyes, red, like embers of a distant fire, immediately locked onto Noah and the woman in the red dress. He was holding a sleek, modern cell phone to his ear, the contrast between the technology and his ancient appearance startling. Darius's gaze swept over the street, over the boy, and then settled on the still, white face of Eleanor. His hand fell, dropping the phone with a clatter. It was the first sign of anything human or vulnerable in the king's entire presence. He moved then, not with the grace of a man, but with the terrifying speed of a predator. He was beside Eleanor in a breath. He knelt, his opulent coat spreading over the wet ground, heedless of the stain. His blood-red eyes, which had held such cold command moments before, were now vast, shocked, and anciently pained. He lifted his mother's head, brushing the white hair back from her forehead. He whispered, the sound raw and desperate, not the voice of a king, but of a long-lost son. Eleanor. Mother. He looked up, his red eyes blazing at Noah. The sight of his grandmother's still form in the king's arms, the king's own raw emotion, paralyzed the boy. You, Darius rasped, his voice barely a breath. She gave you the number. You are with her. He scooped Eleanor's body into his arms. She seemed weightless to him, and stood. 2 figures in dark, high-collared coats emerged from the shadows of the carriage, their movements silent and precise. They moved towards Noah. I need to go with her. I'm her grandson. Noah cried, trying to follow. Darius merely looked down at the child clinging to his side. His expression was once again closed off, the ancient mask back in place. You have saved the king's mother, child, one of the cloaked guards said, his voice deep and neutral, pulling Noah gently but firmly back toward the carriage. That is the end of your ordinary life. You will come with us. The king has many questions only you can answer. The carriage doors opened. Noah was lifted inside, his final, terrified glance seeing the still figure of Eleanor and the commanding, terrible King Darius Nightborn, before the door closed with a soft thud. Noah's ordinary world had shattered. He was a human boy trapped in a world of royalty, ancient secrets, and terrifying power, all because of an old number on a silver locket. He didn't know if minutes or hours passed. Time felt meaningless between heartbeats. The carriage ride was a blur of silence and speed. Noah sat wedged between the 2 tall figures in black coats, whose perfect stillness and unnerving scent, a mix of cold iron and old wood, told him they were not merely men. He kept his eyes fixed on the window, watching the city lights warp and streak as they traveled faster than any human car should dare. The city melted away, replaced by an increasingly dense, shadowy forest, then a sudden turn onto an impossibly old, moss-covered road. The journey ended abruptly at what looked like a derelict, soot-blackened cathedral. But instead of entering the church, the carriage veered sharply, plunging down a stone ramp hidden behind a crumbling buttress. The air immediately grew colder, heavier, smelling of damp earth and deep antiquity. They were descending into the foundations of the world. When the carriage finally stopped, Noah was ushered out into a subterranean courtyard lit by sconces bearing fat, flickering torches. Above them, the ceiling was a dome of rough-hewn granite, carved with symbols Noah couldn't begin to understand. Guards moved everywhere, not rushing, but gliding, their faces pale, their eyes glinting in the low light. This was not a castle, it was a mausoleum of power, hidden beneath the human world. Eleanor had already been taken away. Noah was marched through vast, vaulted hallways, the floor beneath his feet polished black stone that reflected his terrified image back at him. His small, soaking wet shoes made no sound in the terrible quiet. Finally, they arrived at a pair of towering, bronze-bound doors. They swung inward without a touch, revealing a chamber that swallowed the light. This was the throne room. At the far end, raised upon a dais of dark marble, sat Darius Nightborn. He was no longer holding his mother, but he held the space where she should have been. He was dressed in the heavy, elaborate fashion of a forgotten age, his coat a deep crimson that looked black in the dimness, his high collar emphasizing the razor edge of his jawline. His red eyes were the only splash of true color in the room, and they were focused solely on Noah. The king was trying to wrap his centuries of regal discipline around the impossible, sudden return of his human mother. He was struggling, and the strain made him look less like a king and more like a barely contained storm. Noah was pushed gently onto a spot marked by a subtle bronze inlay. He stood alone before the throne. "The guards inform me your name is Noah." Darius's voice was softer here, but far more dangerous. It was the sound of command stripped of all pretense. "Why yes, you're—" Noah caught himself, unsure what to call him. "Noah, you called a number meant only for my personal retainers, a number that hasn't been active in decades." Darius leaned forward slightly, his long fingers steepled under his chin. "Tell me how an ordinary human child came to possess the means to contact the House of Nightborn." Noah swallowed, his wet sweatshirt clinging to him. "It was Eleanor. My grandmother. She gave me the locket. She said it was only for the worst emergency." "The locket." Darius nodded slowly, processing the weight of that one familiar artifact. "Tell me everything. Where did she fall? Did she speak of anything? Did anyone touch her?" "No, sir." "Nobody," Noah insisted, gripping his clammy hands. "We were just walking home, and she just slumped. She fell against the wall. She was just cold. Like ice." Darius regarded him, his red eyes boring into the child. The king knew his mother was an anchor point, a weakness, and this boy was the only conduit to her current state. He needed the truth, and no mere human boy could withhold it under this gaze. Darius subtly shifted his aura, a technique millennia old, non-lethal, designed only to strip the veneer of human deception. He searched the boy's mind for deceit, a quick flash of mental compulsion, like a cold hand brushing Noah's fear. Noah didn't flinch, but his eyes widened, as if a sudden, unexplained draft had swept through the room. Darius immediately withdrew the compulsion. The boy spoke the truth. No conspiracy, no hidden motives, only profound, genuine panic. "So be it," Darius murmured, the disappointment palpable. "You truly know nothing of who she is, or what she carries." Just then, a small, gaunt vampire, looking ancient and scholarly with thick spectacles and a perpetually worried expression, scurried into the room. This was Lord Silas, the royal physician. "My king," Silas chirped, bowing deeply, "the patient, Eleanor, is stabilized, but the condition is grievous. It is not natural collapse. It is the signature of arcane work." Darius stood up, his towering presence demanding attention. "Explain." "She was struck by a targeted magical force, Your Majesty. Faint, ancient, but specifically designed to paralyze the body and suppress the life essence, to render her inert but not technically dead." A form of magical stasis, Silas explained, wringing his hands. It requires considerable power to cast, and it was cast remotely. Someone wanted her found, but they wanted her silent first. Darius turned back to Noah, his expression shifting from detached inquiry to grim confirmation. The simple street collapse was a sophisticated attack. "He's telling the truth, King Darius," Silas added, glancing nervously at Noah. "He is an ordinary boy who is merely trying to save his grandmother. He is innocent." Darius stepped down from the dais, his heavy boots echoing once on the marble. He moved toward Noah, the sheer scale of his power forcing the boy to look up, head tilted back. "Noah," Darius said, the name sounding foreign on his ancient tongue. "You have brought a profound danger to my house. But you have also brought my mother home. For that, you will be kept. You will be kept safe, and you will answer every single question my court has. You are now the witness to a war you cannot comprehend." He didn't threaten, he merely stated fact. He put one hand, heavy and surprisingly gentle, on the boy's shoulder. "Take the child," Darius commanded the guards. "Clean him, feed him, and place him in the western tower. He is not a prisoner, but he is not to leave the castle walls. Lord Silas, inform the court we have a state of emergency. My mother has returned, and she has brought her enemies with her." Noah was led away, dizzy with fear and the impossible knowledge that his grandmother was now the center of a vampiric royal conspiracy. He had saved her life, but he had lost his own. He was trapped in the cold heart of a kingdom he never knew existed. He remembered only corridors, torchlight, and the cold hands that guided him. Noah woke to silence that pressed against his ears, not a peaceful quiet, but the heavy, velvet hush of a tomb. The room was immense, lit not by windows, but by silver candelabras, their flames dancing without visible breeze. His clothes had been replaced with soft, warm fabrics, a terrible, expensive mockery of pajamas, and his wet shoes were gone. He sat up in the colossal canopy bed, realizing he was utterly alone, yet profoundly watched. He wasn't chained, and no lock was visible on the heavy, carved oak door. He was simply where they wanted him. He was not a guest. The chilling reality of the previous night confirmed he wasn't a prisoner either. He was a witness, a piece of evidence too precious to discard and too dangerous to set free. He was the only live connection to the collapse of Eleanor and the sudden, violent intrusion into Darius Nightborn's ancient life. A slight, almost inaudible scraping sound drew his attention. He saw him then, Lord Cale. The guard stood by a massive stone fireplace, cloaked in black, his posture ramrod straight. Cale was one of the silent figures who had driven the carriage. His face, when he finally turned slightly, was angular, beautiful, and utterly devoid of expression. His eyes, the metallic silver Noah had barely glimpsed in the rain, were fixed on the distance, yet no one knew they saw everything. Cale was terrifying not because he was big, but because he was so completely still, like a hunting mechanism waiting for a trigger. "You may have some food," Cale said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that seemed to come from his chest, not his mouth. He gestured to a silver tray laden with pastries and fresh juice. "The king requires you to maintain your strength." Noah stared at the food, his appetite vanished. "Where is my grandmother?" "In the infirmary, under the care of Lord Silas," Cale replied, never looking directly at the boy. "She is stable. Can I see her?" "The king has not permitted it." Noah knew he wouldn't get anywhere by asking. He ate a small piece of bread just to have something to do, his mind racing. He had to see Eleanor. He had to make sure the silent, terrible king wasn't just lying to keep him compliant. He waited. He waited until Cale, who seemed incapable of moving, finally blinked, a momentary lapse in his predatory focus. It was all the chance Noah needed. He darted for the large, tapestried wall opposite the fireplace. Cale reacted instantly, a swift blur of motion, but Noah was already pressing on a small, disguised knot in the tapestry. A seam of the stone wall whispered open. Noah scrambled through the narrow, dark gap and slammed his shoulder against the stone behind him, just as Kale reached the doorway. The passage was pitch black, smelling of dust and damp stone. Noah didn't hesitate, running headlong into the darkness. He ran for what felt like hours through the hidden arteries of the castle, relying on instinct and the occasional spill of torchlight from a distant main corridor. Eventually, the scent changed, the cold stone mixed with medicinal herbs and an almost floral sweetness. He was close. He pushed open a heavy velvet curtain and found himself in a high-arched room filled with medical equipment Noah couldn't name. There she was. Eleanor lay in a bed that looked too big for her, serene and pale, tubes and silver wire connected to her wrist. But someone else was there. Darius Nightborn stood beside the bed, still in his formal attire, utterly motionless. His back was to Noah, but the tension radiating off the king was enough to stop the boy mid-breath. This was not the cold monarch of the throne room. This was a man standing vigil, a man struggling with a wound centuries old. His hands were clasped behind his back, his shoulders rigid. Darius didn't turn around, but he knew Noah was there. "Lord Kale is quite agitated," he said, his voice flat. "It appears my mother has a grandson who inherited her mischievous spirit." Noah cautiously approached the bed, ignoring the king for the moment. Eleanor looked peaceful yet fragile. He reached out and touched her hand. It was still impossibly cold. "Is she going to die?" Noah whispered, looking at Darius. Darius finally turned, his face unreadable. "Silas assures me the magic is only a deep slumber. But the longer she remains so, the greater the danger. Her life force is intact, but suppressed. They are waiting for her to wake." "Who is waiting?" Darius ignored the question. He stepped closer to Noah, his red eyes focused with chilling intensity. "When you found her, before she fell unconscious, did she say anything? Anything at all? A warning, a name, a word you didn't understand?" Noah racked his brain, recalling the terrible moments just before the collapse. The chill. The fall. Eleanor's eyes widening, not in fear, but in sudden, profound recognition. He remembered her voice, strained, not a shout, but a rushed urgency. She was looking at the moon, just before she fell. "She was talking to me, but not really to me." She said, "Protect the moon's light, Noah." The words hung in the air. Darius went utterly rigid. The silver eyes of Lord Kale, who had materialized silently in the archway, snapped to the king. The king's reaction was immediate and visceral, far more powerful than the revelation that his mother was alive. Darius looked away from Noah, closing his eyes briefly as if in pain. He brought his hand up to his chest, touching the heavy velvet over his heart. "The moon's light," Darius breathed, the words heavy with history. "It is real." He opened his eyes, and now the intensity was terrifyingly focused on the boy. "That phrase, Noah, is not an ordinary sentiment. That phrase refers to the celestial heart of the Nightborn. An object of great power given to my mother by my human father centuries ago. A crystal that binds this lineage to the earth and protects our sovereignty." Darius walked to a massive, antique table and slammed his fist down. The force of the impact shook the glass vials. "They didn't just target Eleanor. They targeted the very source of my reign." The collapsing spell was used to silence the protector and draw out the hunters. "Who did this?" Noah asked, terrified but anchored by the need to understand. "An exiled faction. Ancient traitors who seek to dismantle my throne," Darius snarled, the sound closer to a hiss than a word. "They knew my mother was the only one who could keep the artifact hidden, and they knew that if she was discovered, they would be drawn to the only person she had entrusted her secret to, you." Darius moved back toward the bed, his demeanor now that of a strategist facing a war, not a son facing grief. He looked down at his still mother, then at the small, frightened boy. "You, Noah, are not merely a witness," Darius stated, the silver eyes of Kale confirming the assessment. "You are the key. Eleanor entrusted you with the final words, The coordinates, the warning. You are her last, desperate protector. And as such, you are now the most dangerous thing in my castle, both to my enemies and to yourself. I don't know anything else. Noah protested. But you remember, Darius countered, his red eyes holding a flash of hope. She chose you. We will find what the moon's light is, and who is hunting it. And you, boy, will help the king. Darius nodded to Kale, the dismissal silent but absolute. Noah looked at his grandmother one last time, promising himself he would be brave. He was escorted out, no longer a random victim of circumstance, but the reluctant keeper of an ancient, terrible secret. After that, Noah was left alone with his thoughts and the king's terrible promise. The evening in the castle descended into a restless night, yet there was no real darkness, only the suffocating gloom of ancient stone and the perpetual flicker of torchlight. Noah, clean and fed, but with every nerve still humming from the terror of his discovery, was summoned from his silent room. Lord Kale escorted him, maintaining a gap of exactly 3 paces between them, through hallways that felt less like architecture and more like carved mountainside. They were led not to the throne room, but to a private study, a massive chamber lined floor to ceiling with scrolls and leather-bound tomes. Darius was there, standing before a velvet-draped wall. He held a crystal tumbler of deep crimson liquid, contemplating the contents. His intensity was palpable, focused inward on a history that spanned epochs. "Come forward, Noah," Darius commanded, setting the tumbler aside on an antique table carved with twisting roots. "Tonight, we dispense with the shadows. You need to know exactly who you are protecting and why." He moved to the wall and, with a subtle gesture of his hand, dismissed the heavy velvet. Beneath lay a towering, exquisite painting. It was an oil portrait, centuries old, faded yet vibrant with love. It depicted a smiling, remarkably young Eleanor, her hair a rich brown, her eyes sparkling with the same kindness Noah knew. She was standing beside a man. He was tall, dressed in the formal military uniform of a time that looked like legend, his face handsome, strong, and undeniably human. "Your grandmother, Eleanor," Darius said, his voice dropping to a low, rough rumble that was strangely painful to hear. "And beside her, my father, Lord Alaric." Noah stared. The king's father was human. The implication was staggering. Eleanor was not royalty. She was a nursemaid who healed a wound in a battle long forgotten, Darius explained, tracing the painted outline of his father's uniform. Alaric, a powerful human lord, loved her fiercely. "They had me. When I was turned, made into what I am now, I became immortal, bound to the night. But she remained human, bound to the sun and time. She realized the danger I posed to her, and the greater danger my existence posed to her as a human woman, loved by a vampire king's lineage." Darius turned, his red eyes burning with a memory of deep anguish. She left. She left to protect her life, her sanity, and the future of her human line. I let her go, believing it was an act of profound mercy. I was a newborn king. I thought I could survive the loss. He paused, then gestured back to the painting. Before she left, Alaric gifted her something, the celestial heart, what she called the moon's light. It was meant as a token of protection, a bond that would ensure her safety from any enemy of the Nightborn. The artifact draws power from the celestial bodies to weave a powerful protective ward around the wielder and their descendants, a shield against dark magic. She was granted special protection, not just as a lost love, but as the keeper of that artifact, the only thing that could truly secure the purity of our lineage. A sudden, sharp blast, muffled by the deep stone but undeniably violent, shook the study. Scrolls rattled on the shelves. Kale was instantly a silver blur, pressing himself against the doorframe, his hand reaching inside his heavy coat. "What was that?" Noah gasped. Darius's face snapped into cold, regal fury. "They're testing the wards. They're here." Lord Silas burst into the room, his spectacles askew, his voice high-pitched with terror. "Your Majesty, the infirmary. A controlled breach. Ancient shadow magic used to overload the lower wards. They were aiming for Eleanor." "Report on the patient," Darius demanded, his voice echoing with terrible power. "She is untouched, my king. The immediate defense is held. But we intercepted an arcane signature. It belongs to General Vidor, the exiled hand." Darius slammed his fist against the table, the crystal tumbler finally shattering with a sharp crack. "Vidor, the old fool. He believes the king who embraces human blood and protects human keepsakes is weak. He seeks the celestial heart, believing its power should belong to the pure-blood elders." The revelation crystallized the situation for Noah. Vidor wanted the artifact, and Eleanor was the keeper. Darius stared down at the trembling boy. His previous emotional detachment vanished, replaced by a ruthless, protective assessment. Vidor's methods are deliberate. "He knows Eleanor is inert," Darius explained, circling Noah like a predator. "He knows the artifact is hidden, but he does not know where. The collapsing spell was meant to silence her, ensuring she couldn't warn me, but it also forced her closest contact, you, to call the number. You're the link, Noah." Eleanor would have encoded the location in something only a child would keep, something human, something innocuous. Vidor's attack tonight was not meant to kill Eleanor. It was meant to watch me, to see who I protected and who I trusted to find the missing piece. "He thinks you're going to use me," Noah whispered, finally understanding his own terrible importance. "Precisely," Darius confirmed. "He believes I will send you out, the expendable human, to retrieve the clue and then track you back to the artifact's hiding place. You're his bait, not mine." Darius stared down at the small boy, the unwitting target of an ancient vampire coup. In that moment, the king made a terrible decision. "We will not allow them to dictate the war," Darius stated, his red eyes gleaming. "We will use their assumption against them. You will stay under my direct guard. You will remember every rhyme, every secret hiding place, every peculiar story your grandmother ever told you. And you will tell me. Because, Noah, the moon's light does not just protect the nightborn, it protects Eleanor. And you and I are the only ones who can save her now." The king offered no comfort, only the stark, chilling reality of a shared, necessary fight. Noah had been assigned his role. The helpless human boy was now a critical cog in a war for a vampire throne. He had no choice but to accept the terrifying partnership. The escalating threat of General Vidor's faction forced Darius to act with swift, decisive caution. The private chambers of the king, deep in the oldest, most magically warded core of the fortress, were the only place impervious to the kind of ancient arcana Vidor was employing. Before the false dawn of the second night, Eleanor was moved from the infirmary, carried by Darius himself with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a creature of such immense, cold power. Noah was ushered into the same suite. The king's personal sanctuary was stark and powerful, dark wood, heavy tapestries, and defenses woven into the very stone. Lord Kale and 3 other silent, cloaked vampires were stationed outside the massive, silver-inlaid doors, their commitment to the king absolute. Inside, Noah watched Darius supervise the placement of Eleanor's bed near a massive fireplace, the king's movements strangely protective, almost tender. The atmosphere in the room was crushing. Noah, sitting on a low velvet bench near the fire, couldn't shake the terrifying reality of their situation. He glanced at the immobile form of his grandmother, then up at the towering king, and the fear finally crystallized into a desperate question. "Are you going to let her die?" Darius, who had been instructing his physician, Lord Silas, on the calibration of a small, shimmering protective ward around Eleanor's bed, stopped completely. He turned slowly, his crimson eyes locking onto the boy. The question was raw and unforgivable, striking right at the heart of the king's centuries-old failure. "Eleanor is mortal, child," Darius said, his voice flat and edged with iron. Mortality is a vulnerability I cannot conquer. Her human life eventually will end. Noah's face crumpled. No, I mean now. They hit her with magic. If they keep trying, if you don't fight them, she's going to die, and it will be because you brought her here. Darius walked toward the boy, stopping just short of crowding him, the air between them suddenly thick with unreleased tension. His regal mask was fractured, revealing the weary, angry man beneath. "Listen to me, Noah," Darius rasped, his voice dropping to a low, intense growl. "For 2,000 years, I have not spoken her name. For 2,000 years, I thought I had failed the most precious thing I had ever known. I believed her lost to the passage of time, safe from this world. She comes back to me, not in light, but in shadow, poisoned and under threat because of a war I started before she was even born." The king looked back at his mother, his immortal gaze heavy with pain. "They may have taken her life from her, but they will not take her from me again. I am the Nightborn King. I will use every ward, every weapon, and every power this lineage possesses to protect her until the moment she either wakes or is beyond my reach." His voice was a solemn vow. "I will not lose her again." It was the closest the king had ever come to admitting a feeling, a moment of profound vulnerability that cut through Noah's terror. This terrifying, ancient monster wasn't just a king, he was a heartbroken son. It created a sudden, tentative bridge between them, their mutual, desperate need to protect Eleanor. "If she wakes," Noah whispered, his voice trembling less now, "she would know what to do." "Precisely. Which is why Vidor targeted her voice," Darius said, his composure slowly returning, fueled now by resolve. "We do not have the luxury of waiting. We must find the celestial heart. It is the key to her protection and my sovereignty. Tell me again everything you remember about the locket, the stories, the strange things she held dear." Noah thought hard, rubbing the sleeves of the foreign pajamas. He thought of Eleanor's house, the small, cluttered apartment where everything had a memory. He thought of the places she insisted he never touch, the hidden compartments, the secret things. She used to keep things in the floor," Noah said, remembering the uneven tile in the pantry. "She always said the walls had ears, so we had to trust the earth." "A hiding place," Darius affirmed, urging him on. "What did she hide there?" "Not the locket. It was always on her," Noah frowned, concentrating fiercely. "It was books. And a small, wooden box. She kept that box under the loose tile in the pantry of our old apartment. She always made me promise I wouldn't open it until I was older or unless you called the number," Darius finished, a triumphant gleam entering his eyes. "That box will not contain the celestial heart itself, Noah. The artifact is too powerful to be left in a common pantry. But it will contain the first clues, the maps, the ciphers, the instructions left for her human line to follow in case of a threat." Darius rose, the energy of a decisive plan crackling around him. He walked to a massive, carved globe in the corner of the room, spinning it slowly. "Vidor believes he is tracking the king's reaction. He is watching the perimeter, waiting for an expedition to search for the clues," Darius stated, his voice a strategic murmur. "We will give him a target. Kale will lead a contingent in a visible sweep of the city's antique districts, searching for missing Nightborn property. A perfect decoy." He turned back to Noah, a predator's slow smile curving his lips. "But you and I, Noah, will take the silent route. The old apartment is too obvious, too close to the place of the attack. It will be riddled with Vidor scouts by now. We will move fast, using the forgotten passages of the city. Tonight, the king needs a human boy to be his eyes in the human world." The terrifying, silent adventure was scheduled. Noah, standing in the heart of the Nightborn's power, felt the fear subside, replaced by a strange mix of duty and dread. He was going back to his old life, but he was going back with a vampire king to retrieve secrets that could cost both his grandmother's life and the fate of an ancient world. The carriage waiting for them was not the ostentatious, anachronistic relic of the previous night, but a dark, sleek sedan, nearly indistinguishable from the other wealthy ghosts that haunted the city's late hours. This was stealth. Darius changed his appearance subtly, exchanging his heavy, crimson coat for a simple, impeccably tailored black overcoat that minimized his gothic grandeur without diminishing his terrifying presence. Noah sat beside him, feeling the low, constant hum of the king's restrained power. The journey was silent and incredibly fast, navigating the city's underbelly using routes Noah had never known existed: back alleys, closed service tunnels, and roads that seemed to appear and vanish in the darkness. Darius was a study in cold efficiency, his red eyes constantly scanning the shadows, confirming Vidor's presence was exactly where the king expected it to be, watching the traditional vampire hunting grounds and the public avenues. They stopped 3 blocks from Noah's old apartment building, a squat, tired brick structure. Darius lifted Noah out of the car, his touch firm and surprisingly steadying. "The building is warded by now," Darius murmured, his voice too low for anyone but Noah to hear. "We will enter through the fire escape, quietly. You are to point out the pantry, and you are not to deviate from my shadow. Your function is silence, speed, and memory." The king moved with impossible grace, scaling the fire escape like a shadow ascending a wall. Noah scrambled behind him, fear lending him unexpected agility. They slipped through the unlocked kitchen window, a detail Eleanor had always insisted was a failsafe, and landed softly on the warped linoleum floor. The apartment smelled stale, of dust and absence. Noah quickly located the small, narrow pantry. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the dirt, and pried at the loose tile. His fingers found the familiar edge, and the square of tile lifted with a groan of displaced dust. Beneath it was exactly what he remembered, a small, dark wooden box, unassuming and ordinary. Darius took the box, his hand dwarfing the artifact. It wasn't locked. Inside, there was no gleaming crystal or ancient map, but a single, worn children's book, The Children of the Sun and Moon. "This is it." Darius sounded impatient. "A nursery rhyme?" "It was her favorite," Noah said, quietly. "She read it to me every night. She always said the true story was between the lines." Darius opened the book, his long fingers carefully turning the pages. The stories were simple allegories of light and shadow, night and day. But Darius's eyes, trained to centuries of arcane symbols and hidden languages, saw what Noah couldn't. "There is a cipher," Darius stated, running a finger over a small, almost invisible marking pressed into the page beside the sun's drawing. "It points to a location. A nexus of time." He flipped to the final page, reading a cryptic inscription, "Where the moon's hand points to the 10th hour in the deepest night." The astronomical clock, Noah instantly recalled. Downtown, in the center of the old square. "It has a moon phase indicator." "Excellent, Noah," Darius said, a flicker of approval in his red eyes. "That is the next stage. We move." They moved to the window, ready to retreat, but the moment Darius touched the sill, a loud, grating sound from the street below shattered the silence. "Too late," Darius snarled, pushing Noah back behind the kitchen island. Vidor's sweep was not a decoy, it was a distraction for the perimeter. They knew this was the first logical step. The door to the apartment burst inward with violent force. 3 cloaked figures, lieutenants of Vidor, stormed the living room, their movements sharp, trained, and radiating a low, malevolent magic. "The king's pet and the boy," one of them sneered, catching sight of Darius and Noah. "A simple collection." Darius did not speak. He was an explosion of power. One moment he was standing, the next he was a whirlwind of black coat and lethal speed. The ensuing fight was brutal, fast, and terrifying. Darius did not use a sword or gun. His hands were the weapons, moving with a blur of ancient, martial precision. The sound of bone cracking and bodies hitting walls was sickeningly loud. Noah crouched, utterly paralyzed, watching the terrible beauty of the king fighting for his life and his mother's secret. One of the lieutenants, a squat vampire with unnaturally wide shoulders, was knocked across the room, slamming into the wall. He scrambled to his feet, pulling a dagger that glinted faintly with an enchanted silver alloy, a blade that could severely wound a vampire. Seeing the opening, he lunged not at Darius, but directly at the small, hiding boy. Noah screamed, scrambling backward on the dusty floor. Darius reacted with an impossible speed. He intercepted the attack, placing himself between the silver blade and Noah. The blade grazed his forearm, a thin, smoking line of dark blood appeared, but Darius didn't falter. He met the vampire's ferocity with a terrifying, enraged howl. A final, vicious blow sent the lieutenant crashing through the kitchen window and down the fire escape with a guttural scream. The other two were already neutralized, crumpled, and unconscious. Darius stood over Noah, his chest heaving, his immaculate coat slightly torn, the black fabric staining crimson where the silver had touched him. He looked down at the boy, who was trembling uncontrollably. "Do you see now, Noah?" Darius's voice was low, strained with pain and fury. "Vidor is not interested in fair play. You are a means to an end. They will use your innocence and your humanity against me." But the terror in Noah's eyes was mixed with something else, awe. He had just witnessed a king risk his immortal life, taking a serious wound from a lethal weapon to protect a small, expendable human boy. Darius had defended him with a ferocity that was paternal and terrifying all at once. Are you hurt?" Noah whispered, pointing at the silver wound. Darius glanced at the smoking cut, dismissing the pain with a flick of his hand. "A scratch. It slows, but does not stop. We have wasted enough time. Vidor knows we have the book. He will anticipate the clock. We must go." He scooped up the book and, without another word, pulled Noah back out onto the fire escape. The bond forged in the silent terror of the carriage had been cemented in the shared violence of the ambush. Noah no longer merely feared Darius, he respected him. He knew the king, for all his terrifying power, was fighting for the same human heart. The astronomical clock stood in the silent, empty square, a majestic sentinel of brass and darkened bronze, its complex face gleaming faintly under the distant streetlights. The moon indicator was indeed prominent, a small, silver sphere that tracked the true lunar phase. "The moon's hand points to the 10th hour in the deepest night," Darius murmured, repeating the cipher from the storybook as he examined the clock's mechanism. The deepest night was clearly midnight. The 10th hour was the target. The king's hand, cool and strong, settled on the lunar phase dial. He applied a precise, controlled pressure and slowly turned the dial until the silver sphere aligned exactly with the 10 position on the main clock face. With a soft, metallic click that was deafening in the silence, a small panel near the bottom of the clock sprang open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single object, a heavy, ornate key. It wasn't made of brass or steel, but of a dull, ancient metal that absorbed light, intricately carved with the same thorn-pierced crown symbol that was on Eleanor's locket. This was the final physical clue. "The key to the celestial heart," Darius stated, lifting the heavy object. It felt cold in his palm, possessing a faint, rhythmic pulse of its own. "The final vault is within the castle walls. We return now, Noah. The game is almost over." They used the sedan's speed to make a rapid, tactical retreat back to the hidden castle, Darius clutching the key with a possessiveness that bordered on reverence. Once inside his private chambers, the king was instantly back in motion, securing the key. "This key is now the most hunted object in the world," Darius told Noah, his red eyes blazing with grim determination. He strode toward a massive, iron-bound chest set into the wall, a safe of unimaginable age and strength. He placed the key inside, turning the complicated locking mechanism with a series of precise, powerful movements, sealing the evidence of the celestial heart's location away from any conventional threat. Now we wait. We prepare the ritual to retrieve the artifact safely, a process that takes time, Darius explained, straightening up. Vidor will soon realize his decoys have failed and his men were dispatched. He knows the final vault is in the castle, now he needs the location inside the castle. As if summoned by the king's words, a sudden, psychic wave of cold, dizzying energy crashed through the room. It was not a physical blast like the previous night, but a magical violation, an intrusion that made Noah's skin crawl and the fire in the hearth flicker and dim. Darius instantly roared, a sound of ancient fury and protective rage. Vidor, you coward! Get out! The king spun toward Eleanor's bed. A dark, vaporous shadow was hovering over her still form, thin and invasive, like smoke being sucked into her. It was a projection of the general's power, a telepathic probe designed to forcefully extract information from a sleeping mind. There inside her head, Noah shrieked, feeling the pain and terror of the violation as if it were his own. He rushed toward the bed, trying to wave the shadow away, feeling utterly useless. The king was already there, raising his hands, unleashing a wave of incandescent, crackling red energy, pure night-born power, to repel the invasive magic. But it was too late. The general had found the opening. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open. They were wide, confused, and filled with a momentary flash of silver light that wasn't hers, a reflection of the magic possessing her. She wasn't awake. She was being puppet. She looked around the king's opulent chambers, her gaze lost and panicked. Her lips parted, dry and cracked. She spoke, her voice thin, weak, and slurring with the pain of the forced consciousness. The crypt, always. The lowest point, the tower crypt. The words were barely out before the shadow magic snapped back, ejected by Darius's roaring power. Eleanor's eyes rolled back, and she slumped immediately back into the deep, magic-induced slumber. The violation was complete. Darius stood over her bed, shaking with controlled violence, his hands still charged with residual power. His furious, red gaze swept across the room, focusing on Noah. Noah was huddled on the floor, weeping from the sheer terror of what he had witnessed, the brutal, non-physical assault on his grandmother's mind, and the knowledge that he had been standing right there, powerless, while the final, critical secret was stolen. The tower crypt, Darius breathed, the location ringing with grim finality. The lowest point of the oldest dungeon. The vault is there. And now, thanks to Vidor's cowardice, he knows it too. The king walked back to the massive iron-bound chest, slamming his hand against the cold metal where the key lay protected. His fury was cold and absolute, directed equally at the enemy's audacity and at his own brief failure to ward his mother completely. He forced the location from her, Darius stated, his voice flat with menace. He violated her mind, seeking the single piece of information we risked our lives for. The key is safe, but the location is out. He looked at Noah, his gaze softening slightly, acknowledging the boy's shared trauma. You witnessed an act of war, child. A truly despicable one. But now we have the key, and we have the target. The only question Vidor has left is when we will make our move. He will be waiting in the shadows of the tower crypt. The battle lines were drawn. The key was safe, the vault was known, and Eleanor was once again the center of a deadly, inevitable confrontation. The third night descended with a sense of suffocating inevitability. Darius had been meticulously reviewing the ancient schematics of the tower crypt, preparing the ritual and the defenses for the inevitable confrontation. Noah, sitting quietly near Eleanor's bed, watched the king, a figure of intense focus and barely restrained dread. They both knew General Vidor wouldn't wait long after successfully probing Eleanor's mind. The attack, when it came, was not a blast of raw magic or a frontal assault. It was a cold, precise infiltration that bypassed the outer magical wards entirely. A high, metallic scream echoed through the ancient stones, the sound of the inner, non-magical mechanical defenses failing. Alarms, designed to alert the ancient Nightborn court to mundane physical threats, rang out, shrill and desperate. Darius's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. Impossible. Vidor would not risk a public breach of the physical barrier. It would invite human notice. He was on his feet instantly, moving with deadly calm towards the door where Lord Kale stood sentinel. "Report, Kale," Darius commanded. Lord Kale turned, and for the first time, the stoic mask that had defined him was gone. His metallic silver eyes held a triumphant, cold glare. He didn't bow. He didn't even flinch. "The defenses are breached, my king," Kale said, his gravelly voice now laced with contemptuous satisfaction. "The general is inside." Before Darius could react, before the king's superior speed could engage, Kale moved. Not to attack Darius, but toward the wall where the iron-bound chest was embedded. Kale was a specialist, trained not just in guard duty, but in arcane security. He didn't try to break the ancient lock. He knew the subtle magical frequency of Darius's latest defensive ward, a secret known only to the king's inner, most trusted circle. Kale placed his hand flat against the safe, his silver eyes glowing faintly. There was a low thrum of displaced energy, a faint scent of sulfur, and then, with a heavy, final clunk, the intricate locking mechanism released. Lord Kale, the terrifyingly loyal guard, was Vidor's spy. Darius roared, a sound that shook the chamber and rattled the vials on the nearby table. "Traitor! After 2 centuries of service. Loyalty is to the lineage, not to the king who kneels to a human shadow," Kale sneered, pulling the safe door open. He reached inside, his fingers closing around the cold, ancient metal of the ornate key. "Vidor will restore the true, uncorrupted Nightborn rule. Your mother's presence is the final proof of your failure, Darius." With the key secure, Kale didn't linger. He vanished through the massive door, his movements a blurring shadow. He was heading for the location Eleanor had been forced to reveal, the Tower Crypt. "Noah, stay with Eleanor," Darius commanded, already halfway to the door. But Noah, galvanized by the sickening sight of the betrayal and the sound of his grandmother's forced words, surged forward. He knew the castle's secret passages. He knew the fastest way. "No, I know a shortcut. The passages are faster than the main halls," Noah shouted, pointing desperately toward the massive stone fireplace. "They lead straight down to the oldest part. The dungeon level is just below this chamber." Darius paused, his fury momentarily checked by the tactical necessity of speed. He stared at the child, realizing Noah's intimate knowledge of the structure, learned through years of hiding and play, was suddenly their greatest advantage. "Show me," Darius commanded, his voice tight with lethal intent. Noah didn't hesitate. He scrambled to the far corner of the fireplace, his small fingers finding the disguised seam in the stone. He pulled, and a narrow slab of rock slid inward with a grinding sound of stone against stone, revealing a vertical shaft and a precarious set of winding stairs descending into absolute darkness. Darius snatched up a heavy, silver-pummeled torch from the wall, its flame instantly leaping to a supernatural brightness. He pushed Noah into the opening ahead of him, then followed, the dark velvet of his coat brushing against the cold, rough stone walls. They descended at a dizzying pace. Noah scrambled down the uneven steps, navigating the hidden passage by memory, his small body leading the way. Behind him, Darius was a constant, powerful presence, his red eyes narrowed, his anger simmering. The sound of Kale's betrayal and the king's low, grinding fury seemed to amplify in the confined space. "The Tower Crypt is the oldest dungeon, a place of containment and oblivion," Darius explained, his voice echoing off the stone. The vault containing the celestial heart is at its lowest point, sealed behind a door that only that key can open. As they plummeted down the hidden shaft, the sound of the public alarms faded, replaced by the deep, ominous silence of the castle's forgotten foundation. They were leaving the modern world behind, heading toward a confrontation in the primordial darkness. Noah burst out of the final hidden exit, a narrow, rusted gate, into a massive, cavernous space. It was damp, echoing, and bitterly cold. The tower crypt. Stone pillars the size of ancient trees held up a ceiling lost in the blackness. Scattered torches cast immense, grotesque shadows that danced with every slight breeze. And in the center of the chamber, illuminated by a single, powerful magical orb of sickly green light, was Lord Kale. He stood before an enormous, arched door made of obsidian, bound by iron bands inscribed with seals that looked thousands of years old. The door to the final vault. Kale had the key raised, about to insert it into the lock. Darius surged forward, dragging Noah into the shadow of a pillar. "Stop." Kale turned, a cruel smile stretching his perfect lips. "Too late, my king. The new dawn begins now. And the throne belongs to the Nightborn, not to a human child's favorite king." The final confrontation had begun in the coldest, deepest heart of the castle. Darius Nightborn, his last reserve of control broken by betrayal, and Noah, the terrified human boy, were face to face with the man who would steal their future. The tower crypt was vast and bone-chillingly cold, a sprawling circular chamber that felt like the bottom of the world. It was the original foundation of the castle, a place where the air itself was heavy with sorrow and forgotten magic. The only illumination came from Kale's sickly green magical orb and the single, burning torch Darius held. The shadows were enormous, distorted, and seemed to hold their breath. In the center of the chamber, before the colossal obsidian vault door, Lord Kale stood with grim purpose. He had retrieved the key from the king's safe and was now pressing it into the intricate lock. "Stop, traitor." Darius's voice was a whipcrack of pure, unfettered fury. He stepped out from the shadow of the pillar, pushing Noah firmly behind him. "You break 2,000 years of Nightborn law for the whispers of a lunatic." Kale turned, the ornate key half inserted. His silver eyes fixed on the king with contempt. "I serve the integrity of the lineage, Darius. Not a king weakened by human affection. You let your human mother live. You let the human boy remain, and you jeopardize the single artifact that grants us sovereignty. Vidor will ensure this family tree grows in the darkness, unburdened by your sentiment." Kale completed the turn of the key. With a sound like the grinding of tectonic plates, the massive, millennia-old seals on the obsidian door shattered, and the vault of the celestial heart began to slowly swing inward. "We will settle your misguided loyalty after I secure the artifact." Darius roared, lunging forward with impossible speed, his cloak swirling out like bat wings. The battle was instantaneous and brutal. Kale was a master fighter, an ancient vampire whose discipline and focus were terrifying. He met the king's attack not with a sword, but with a series of powerful, focused bursts of shadow magic, forcing Darius to weave and deflect. The clash of energies, Darius's incandescent red power versus Kale's cold, shadowy manipulation, sent waves of force crashing against the stone pillars. Kale fought defensively, buying time. His objective was clear: keep Darius away for the few seconds needed to access the celestial heart. As the vault door opened, it revealed a small, internal chamber, at the center of which was a shimmering pedestal. On the pedestal sat a crystal, the celestial heart, a crystalline object that gently pulsed with the soft, white light of a captured full moon. "It is mine, my king!" Kale shouted, preparing to dash inside. Darius managed to bind Kale momentarily with a chain of scarlet energy. But before the king could move, Kale, with a desperate surge, yanked a second object from inside his coat, a crystal that was the exact inverse of the one in the vault. It was a deep, obsidian black, and it glowed faintly with a harsh, yellowish light, like a tiny, captured sun. Vidor anticipated your victory. Kale screamed, his voice wild with zealotry. He gave me the sun's absorber. This twin object was forged to nullify the moon's light. When they touch, the Nightborn protection is shattered forever. Kale broke free of Darius's bind and sprinted toward the vault. Noah, still cowering in the shadow of the pillar, felt a sudden, sharp, crystalline memory snap into his mind. It wasn't his memory. It was Eleanor's voice, a fleeting memory from the storybook, somehow transferred to him during Vidor's forced telepathic probe, a final, desperate warning woven into the structure of the moon and sun fable. The moon's light can protect, but the sun's shadow can destroy. The two must never meet, or the light will vanish forever, leaving only the endless night. Noah understood the truth that Darius, in his fury and surprise, did not yet grasp. Kale wasn't planning to steal the artifact. He was planning to annihilate it, rendering the king powerless. No, don't let him. Noah screamed, surging out from the shadows, his voice a frantic, high-pitched alarm that cut through the thunder of the fight. He pointed a small, shaking finger at the obsidian crystal in Kale's hand. Don't let him touch the moon's light with the sun's absorber. Eleanor said they cancel each other out. The absorber destroys the protector. The words were raw, desperate truth. Darius, slowed by the silver wound and fighting the shock of the twin artifact, processed the human boy's information instantly. It was the key. He had been fighting to stop the theft. He needed to fight to prevent the fusion. His entire strategy shifted. He ceased the attack on Kale and instead focused his power on the environment. With a powerful surge of pure Nightborn command, Darius focused the scarlet energy, not at Kale, but at the enormous stone pillar directly behind the traitor. The ancient stone cracked and groaned. The pillar, weakened by centuries and the preceding magical assaults, buckled. Kale, just inches from the pedestal, heard the terrible sound of the collapsing support structure. He glanced up, his eyes widening in alarm, his instinct forcing him to freeze and shift his weight to maintain balance as the crypt threatened to fall. That moment of hesitation, the natural, life-preserving reaction Darius knew Kale couldn't suppress, was all the king needed. Darius launched himself forward, not for Kale, but for the traitor's hand. He seized the wrist holding the black crystal and twisted with brutal, immortal strength. The sun's absorber flew from Kale's grasp, skittering across the stone floor away from the vault. Kale screamed, a raw sound of foiled fanaticism. Before he could recover, Darius landed a devastating blow, not with power, but with precision, to the base of Kale's neck. The vampire crumpled, lifeless and defeated. Darius stood panting over the fallen traitor, the torchlight flickering across the open vault. The celestial heart still pulsed with its soft, protective lunar glow. The king turned, his red eyes settling on the small, trembling boy who had just saved his sovereignty with a simple, remembered story. You have saved the lineage, Noah, Darius said, the words heavy with genuine, stunned respect. He walked into the vault and secured the moon's light, placing the sacred artifact inside his coat, close to his heart. The threat was neutralized. The artifact was secured. The king's throne was safe, all thanks to the terrifying courage and sharp memory of a 10-year-old human boy. When the dust settled, the castle slept for the first time in centuries. 3 days had passed since the terrifying confrontation in the tower crypt. The immense stone castle, usually a place of quiet, Gothic dread, now hummed with a subdued victory. General Vidor and the traitor Kale were dealt with, the threat neutralized, and the celestial heart, the moon's light, was safely secured in a new, undisclosed location, radiating a low, stabilizing pulse of energy throughout the ancient fortress. In the king's private chamber, the sun, which had been a distant enemy, now filtered weakly through the thick glass of the window, bathing the room in a gentle, hazy light. Eleanor was awake. The immediate danger had passed the moment the celestial artifact was secured. Lord Silas confirmed that the dark, stasis-inducing magic had lifted, allowing her body's natural functions to slowly return. She was still weak, pale, and deeply confused about the last few days, but she was smiling, a thin, genuine smile that brought warmth back into the cold room. Noah sat quietly by her bedside, holding her frail, warm hand. The wild terror and paralyzing fear he had carried since finding her on the wet street were gone, replaced by a quiet thoughtfulness and a surprising, almost adult gravity. He was no longer just a 10-year-old boy. He was the primary witness to a royal coup, the keeper of a critical memory, and a key figure in the survival of the Nightborn line. He had faced down the shadows and won. Eleanor squeezed his hand weakly. "My brave boy," she murmured, her voice raspy. "You called the number. You knew." "You told me to," Noah whispered back, a faint smile touching his lips. "You told me in an emergency. The locket was the only thing to trust." A shadow fell across the room, not a dark one, but the imposing figure of Darius Nightborn. The king approached the bedside, his movements now slow and measured, devoid of the battlefield tension that had defined him for days. He was dressed simply, the heavy, formal coat replaced by a dark, soft velvet tunic, the casual attire of an immortal lord. Darius looked at Eleanor, and in his red eyes, the raw, ancient pain had softened into profound relief. He was reunited, finally and truly, with the one human who knew his oldest self. "The physician says you will be well, Mother," Darius said, his voice low and reverent. Eleanor's gaze shifted to her son, taking in his exhaustion and the dark shadows beneath his eyes, and then to the human boy who had suffered the ordeal to save her. "Noah saved me," she stated simply, her eyes locking onto Darius. "He risked everything. He answered your call." Darius nodded, turning fully to Noah. He was no longer the raging king of the crypt, but a king extending an impossible offer. From an inner pocket, Darius produced a small object. It was a dagger, not one meant for battle, but one of exquisite, ornate craftsmanship. The handle was carved from polished obsidian, and the guard was shaped like two crescent moons, intertwining. It was a formal, traditional symbol of the Nightborn house. Darius knelt, bringing his eyes level with the boy's. "Noah," Darius began, his voice deep and sincere. "You face betrayal, ancient magic, and the threat of eternal night. You did not flinch, and you provided the critical knowledge that saved this lineage from destruction. You are not human in the way we measure power, but you possess the greatest strength of all, loyalty and courage. Kale saw you as bait. I see you as a shield." He held out the dagger. "This is a keeper's blade. It is a symbol of protection and acceptance into the very structure of this house. It means you are under the absolute, eternal ward of the Nightborn throne." Noah accepted the dagger, its obsidian handle cold and strangely comforting in his hand. He looked up at the king, the full weight of Darius's words pressing down on him. "You saved the lineage," Darius affirmed, a rare, powerful emotion crossing his face. "You are my mother's protector. You are family now." The word family resonated through the chamber, shattering the silence of centuries. Noah looked from the dagger to the king, and then back to Eleanor, who was watching him with loving eyes. His home was destroyed, his life exposed, and the world he knew was gone. But here, in the heart of the shadow, he was needed. He had a purpose that transcended rent and school and normal life. I want to stay," Noah said, his voice firming with newfound resolve. "I want to stay with Eleanor. And I want to learn how to keep the shadows out." Darius nodded slowly, a trace of approval in his gaze. "Then so it shall be. You will have tutors, not just in history and language, but in self-defense, arcane symbols, and the politics of our court. You will be safe, protected, and prepared. You will be raised as the human link of this house." Hours later, the sun was higher, casting long, gilded beams across the stone courtyard. The weather had cleared entirely, The sky was a deep, impossible blue. Darius and Noah stood on a secluded balcony, looking out over the misty, forest-covered mountains that hid the ancient fortress. Darius had shed all vestiges of the formal king, standing beside Noah as a mentor. The contrast between the immortal vampire, millennia old and supremely powerful, and the small, determined human boy could not have been greater, yet they were bound by the unconscious woman resting inside. "Welcome to the new dawn, Noah," Darius said softly, watching the light spread. Noah looked at his dagger, then back at the king. He knew his life would never be simple, never be easy, but here, in the cold, strange shadows of the Nightborn castle, he had found something he never knew he needed, a place to belong, a reason to be brave, and the impossible. Fierce protection of an ancient king. His story was just beginning.